and it basically comprises a project administration. So it is on chapter 7 of the Green Book and chapter 6 of the study notes. The study notes is a very short 2-pager, which is basically just a basic outline of cost reporting and cover letters, etc. So the main thing that we're going to focus on in this last section is project administration. So we've done everything up to stage 4 at this stage, and we're going to cover stages 5 and 6 where we actually get onto site, where we're going to do a estimate or look at, after the contractor has been appointed, the administration surrounding that, and also then we're going to do a payment certificate also. So we're going to run through that. Okay, so getting into chapter 6, variations. Okay, so firstly, variations is says exactly what it is. It's your contractor has been appointed on the project, and whenever there's any changes that justifies any remuneration towards him, that will constitute additional cost that the contractor can get. So it's basically any changes that's made on the project will influence the cost of the project. So it can either go upwards or downwards. Some items might be omitted or so. So we've got alterations or changes are known as variations and result in an addition of new items of work or the omission of work originally measured by the QS and priced by the contractor. Okay, so very straightforward. Only the principal agent has the authority to do, order to amend or do issue variation orders on a project. That's contractually. And instruction will be issued to the contractor, who cannot refuse to carry out the varied work or the changed work. Remedies would be an adjustment of the contract price and the appropriate circumstances, an extension of time. Okay, then before the formal instructions is issued to the contractor, the QS may be requested to advise the principal agent. So the principal agent usually works through the QS or through the engineers or whoever constitutes a or instructed that a change should be made. For instance, structural engineer might say, okay, but the soil isn't conducive for only a non-reinforced strip footing, so let's place some reinforcement in it, and that would result in a variation to take place. Okay, so it is advisable for the QS to keep an up-to-date record of all variation orders. Many disputes is caused by this. Usually a instruction is issued on site, and then it's not costed properly or timeously, and usually after the project then the contractor comes back and says, look, but I wanted to or I did this, but I'm entitled for this cost, and then it hasn't been calculated, or it is justified and everyone agrees that the contractor should be paid for it, but then it pushes the project over the budget. And that's basically the two risks with variation orders. Okay, this record is referred to as a variation account, and it enables the QS to advise the principal agent on the financial position. So it's basically just using the bill of quantities, measuring all additions and omissions timelessly to get to amount to say whether yes, this change will not incur too much cost on the project, so or additional cost on the project. The details of variations may be recorded on formal instruction forms, in minutes of the site meetings, on revised drawings, in notes made by the clerk of works, or in correspondence related to the project. So it's usually in writing. Verbal instructions or variations is not seen as a accountable or a contractual instructions. So all variation orders has to be on paper. Additional work may be required, so the measurement of quantities and negotiation of rates for new items. So usually if it's an addition of items that has been included in the bill of quantities already, but the quantities wasn't measured in to the right total, that amount is then usually, or those items are easily adjusted because you've got a rate that you can just calculate to the remeasured quantity. Whereas if you've got a new item, for instance, changing the door frames from a steel door frame to a wooden door frame, that will constitute new rates from the contractor to be provided, and that's usually negotiation between the QS and the contractor. Contractors usually try and load as much as they can onto those items, whereas the QS wants to keep it as low as possible. Okay, it is important that the approved variation orders are taken into account when preparing valuations for interim payment certificates. This is very important. Sometimes I've seen QSs that do not incorporate these variations from the start, but leave it to the end, and that's usually where disputes comes from. Okay. So a site instruction book is kept on site. It's basically just a booklet with a numbering system. These days we do it electronically, but it's a systematic instruction book that just keeps all of the instructions in place. And we'll get to variation orders or instructions that doesn't really constitute variations just now. Site instructions are generally used by the architect or any other of the agents and may vary. They extend or reduce contract works. A site instruction may be given purely to instruct the contractor to do something that he's supposed to do anyway, like for instance housekeeping, keeping the site nice and clean. And then site instructions may be given to the contractor to address defective work. Anything that, for instance, if he build a wall skew, he will be instructed to break it down and rebuild it, which will not constitute a variation order. Okay, clearly the foregoing site instructions will not require adjustment to the contract sum because the contractor already had to do everything accordingly. Okay, so variations which will require adjustment of the contract sum usually deals with changes to the specification or the quantities of the items included in the BOQ, okay, additions to the project, execution of work under different conditions from the previous envisioned and described in the BOQ. For instance, if you have a specification change, for instance, if you do a swimming pool, your touch pads have to be within where the swimmers usually touch the walls on Olympic swimming pools, has to be within 2 millimeters. So the tolerance of the swimming pool might be different. So for instance, if it's not an Olympic standard or FINA standard swimming pool, that standard, it might vary between 5 and 10 millimeters, the width or the breadth of the swimming pool. Whereas if it's changed, for instance, from a non-compliant FINA swimming pool at the start of the project to a FINA compliant swimming pool, for instance, where the tolerances are much stricter, it will constitute additional cost because the contractor has to spend more time in getting the accuracy correct. So I hope that explained it better for you. Or for instance, other thing might be just getting the strength of the concrete, for instance, stronger also. The instruction of new items not previously included in the contract. For instance, now if you're working in a community, you have to take into account maybe education of the community, talks with the community, which wasn't included in the initial tender brief, or something in that sense. Okay, all instructions issued during the course of the contract should be covered by sequential numbering contract instructions that shall all originate from the office of the principal agent. So this is just the site instruction booklet that we spoke about in a previous slide. Okay, contract rates, wherever possible, this should be contract rates must be applied in calculating the variation cost of variations. So that's just what we already spoke about. Whenever there's a change in item and the rate is not changed, then the existing rate should be used to calculate the variation orders. The application of contract rates is only valid for new work if it's identical to the work included in the BOQ. I think that's self-explanatory that it is for work if the items are exactly the same rates can be used. Okay, drastic reduction in the scope of certain work which has been included in the BOQ could mean that the original rate would no longer be apply to the remainder of the work. So that's what we already spoke about. If there's a change in the specification, then the rate will have to be adjusted. Okay, pro rata adjustments. So it is sometimes possible to calculate the pro rata rate on the basis of the existing contract rate to arrive at a fair rate for the new item. So basically this is just a negotiation process. For instance, if you've got a roof structure and now you change the roof structure, the rate should change for all the purlins on site. So a good method would be to calculate what would be the cost for a purlin of this size, and then calculating what the rate for a smaller purlin would be, taking the length of the purlin or the square meter area of the purlin if you look at it from the side also. The reason for taking this example is, for instance, purlins are measured in number in your bill of quantities, but to get to a rate without going and getting quotations for it, you can very quickly calculate a more or less rate for the purlins. The same can be for your windows. Your windows is also measured as a number item in your bill of quantities, but if you have maybe a size change or so, you can calculate the estimated rate for a smaller window by just taking the square meter rate for the existing windows and reducing it, or for a bigger window you can escalate it, vice versa. Okay, day works. Day works is basically pricing of items by means of day work charges. Necessitates the keeping of site records and cost of labor, material and plant used for those particular items. So day works is basically labor rates that you've got in your bill of quantities. So, the civil engineers like to use that, and that is usually where you have a tariff for instance, a bricklayer, or a tariff for a certain type of artisan, or just a general labor on site, and now you have an addition to the project, and now you can refer back to that labor rates and say, okay, this item will take me 2 days longer. It will include this artisan and this laborer to do this work. It will take him 2 days. This is the rate per hour, and then you can calculate what the total cost for that item would be. What they say here is you need to keep record of it. So obviously you need to keep track of what the actual hours worked on those items. So usually the clerk of works, someone together with the contractor's site agent, keep record of how much time was spent on that item. Day work items are valued at basic prices for labor and material and increased by a percentage to cover the overheads and the profit. Yeah, so usually those rates are given that we spoke about here, and then the contractor usually has a separate item where he adds his profit and overheads to it, usually a percentage on that. It is only used as a last resort when no other options or valuation is possible. Okay, so you can see it's just a lot of admin, and it's usually difficult to keep track of. If you've got a good site presence, like the civil engineers usually have, or on engineering projects, it's much easier to implement because you've got someone from your side also looking at the implementation of that item. Evaluation of work based on the day works charges would arise where the work concerned bears no comparison to the work originally included in the contract. So in short is, if you do not have rates or other items measured for those items, then it would be best to use, and then only day works will kick in. If you have rates that you can use, it's easier and better to use bill rates for items completed. So it's best to have a completed item measured than reverting back to day works where you have to measure time and output and so on. Okay, fair valuation. Quantum merit. So it is sometimes happens that variations are required, which not only bears no direct relationships to contract rates, and which also cannot be valued on day work basis. Okay, so this occurs, e.g., for instance, when the execution of work has been affected by the client being unable to provide certain working or storage areas for use by a contractor. For instance, if certain circumstances on site, now the contractor has to incur additional cost to secure the site. It was said in the tender briefing that the site would be secured, and now the contractor arrives on site and sees that there is no security on site. Now he has to get a security guard, he has to fence off the site, etc. And obviously these items and these rates are calculated to the discretion of the QS and the principal agent and the contractor, evaluating previous projects and comparing it to each other, comparing or maybe phoning a security company and asking what would a person like this maybe cost to be on site, etc., etc. The only solution when this occurs is the QS must demonstrate resourcefulness. Yeah, so you have to just make sure that the client pays for what he is getting. So it's just basically getting to a point of good value for money. Okay, so then we get to prime cost items. So prime cost items is items that's included in the BOQ, which at tender stage there hasn't been a design yet. So the adjustment of the prime cost items necessitates the omission of the prime cost allowance. So basically it is usually what we do, and I've spoken about this already, prime cost items is, for instance, where you have for supply of attic stock for tiling, for additional tiling to be installed on site. So you will have your prime cost item, and then you will have a markup underneath that item as a percentage on top of that item. So just going through the notes before I explain it further is the addition of new costs which must be substantiated by invoices and quotations. So you get quotations for the actual item, and then the contractor just adds that percentage that he already indicated in his bill of quantities to that item. When adjusting the prime cost amount, it is necessary to ensure that the item actually chosen relates to the description given. So usually what we do is we get free quotations, because usually it's a design and install. For instance, your HVAC or your air conditioning, usually when it goes out on tender, when it's a smaller project and there's no mechanical engineer appointed, then what you would do is you would put a PC amount in the bill of quantities, and then when you get onto site or the contractor is appointed, he has to supply you with free quotations, and then you have to evaluate the cost and the design of that installation. Okay, and then the contractor has his markup that he puts onto the actual amount that goes to the supplier. Okay, then provisional sums, which is very similar to that, is adjustment of provisional sums involves omission of the summary allowed in the BOQ. So basically, this was in the previous slide as well. All that it says is the amount is allowed for in the BOQ, and then it is omitted from the BOQ, and then the actual cost is then added. So it's just a system that's in place. So basically, what you want to do is you want to try and keep within the budget of that item. Then adjustment of the actual subcontractor sum requires a consequent adjustment of the amounts related to the contractor profit and attendance. So very similar to your prime cost items. The only difference here is now it's not only the material that's applied, it is now also the installation of that of those items. So it's usually your subcontractor that's appointed. Okay, some forms of contracts allow for the adjustment of the contract profit on specialist subcontract work in the event of major reductions in the value of the provisional sums. For instance, the contractor may have budgeted for, you've seen the item and you allowed maybe 100,000, but when you get onto site, the item is only going to be 20,000. But the contractor already budgeted for this in his contract and his cash flow, so he's compensated usually on a type of adjustment of his percentage, that markup that he gets on that item. So it's just the administration type of arrangement. Then the adjustment of the contractor's profit is generally a straightforward percentage calculation. So yeah, so it's a percentage that he has put in his tender document that's just applied to the actual cost of that item. Then contract price adjustment provision. Okay, so I hope everyone has heard about the contract price adjustment, and it's a generic title for the formula that's applied to calculate the post-contract compensation to contractors. So it's basically inflation. So there's a set of adjustment percentages, the inflation rates, for instance, for steel work, for earthworks, and for carpentry, wood, and those items fluctuate continuously. So the Bureau of Economic Research, Stellenbosch, publishes indexes that's usually used for your CPAP, and all that it says, it's just an adjustment of the rates according to inflation. So CPAP usually applies on contracts that runs over more than 12 months, arising from the price fluctuations on an average basis, and applies to both main and subcontractors. Okay, so these inflation rates applies to both of them. The information used in each of the formula to calculate the compensation to obtain from indices published by the or Stats SA, and is applied according to the defined work groups. So the work groups is just what I indicated now. So the main short and the long of it is CPAP is just basically inflation calculated on a month-to-month basis on a project. Okay, then we get to our final accounts, and final accounts is quite important because this is where what the final account of the project is going to be. So preparation of a final account is a process whereby the contract sum is adjusted to take into account all variations, savings, extra work, adjustment of provisional sums, etc., which may have arisen during the course of the project. the contract in order to state the final cost. So it's all of those variations, additions, omissions, etc., basically added up to your final account. Agreement on the cost of variations with the contractor's contractor survey and representative is part of the process. So it's usually best if you keep track during the course of the project and not leave it to the end of the project and now having to remember what was said, going through all of the variation orders, getting proof of actual variations that happened. It's easiest just to do the variation adjustments as you go through the project. Final accounts are initially prepared in draft form and include omissions of budgetary allowances. So it's basically those budgetary allowances that we spoke about, those PC amounts and provisional sums is omitted, and the actual cost is then added. So it's a, like I said, it's just an administration type of procedure where you omit the one item and then you just add the new item. The draft final account should be sent to the principal agent for comment and confirmation. Then the content and method compiling final accounts should be clearly understood by both clients. So communication is key here. That's why it's important to keep the final account up to date during the course of the project. All factors and reasons for variations on the original tender price should be clearly indicated on the final accounts. So it's just record keeping of any changes. If the contractor disputes the correctness of the final account, the principal agent and the contractor should endeavor to resolve differences. This is usually done by the QS and the contractor before it actually goes to the principal agent, just to save time, because it is quite a cumbersome job of going back and forth between certain items first. So it's best to sort it out first and then go to the principal agent. The principal agent shall proceed to issue a final payment certificate based on his determination of the contract value. Okay, and then the contractor is free to refer his differences with the principal agent to the dispute resolution provisions included in the agreement. So if he doesn't agree, then it usually goes to the mitigation type of clauses in your contract. And this is something which you want to try and avoid, because this usually is a lengthy and costly process. Typical final statements and final summary are provided to explain how final accounts are set out and how they are used to convey the final contract value. So it's basically just there's certain type of forms that is completed in your final account. And we're going to look at a example just now. Okay, so in your final account, your final statement, this is something that's included in your final account. So you can see this was the project, new building for owner incorporated at stand so and so in Pretoria. So the contractor was appointed for this amount. The VAT is always subtracted first and then added later on. Then you've got your additions and omissions. So net additions and omissions. So it seems like there was some omissions and savings on the project. So the final the contract value was estimated at or calculated at 2.3 million, and then add differences in the preliminaries. So there was some additional preliminaries that was added, and then you get to your contract price adjustments. Your contract price adjustments is that CPAP that we spoke about earlier on, that was issued, and then that is added as well on the project. And then you have maybe penalties. In this case there was no penalties, and then you add your VAT at the bottom and you get to your final amount that is due to the contractor. And then you can see there's a place where it can be signed. Usually what we do is we have 4 signatures, one where the QS measures, the principal agent measures, and the contract measures signs, and then the client signs also as the final on the final statement. Okay, then you've got your final summary. this is just a summary of your net omissions and additions. So what you can see is usually all of the items, you've got some variation orders. So this variation order number 1 constituted the omission of a certain item and the addition of another item, and then VO2 again the same. Here you can see there was a bit of a saving, remeasurement of foundation. So originally there was allowed for 85,000. In the end it amounted to 90,000. Then you've got the remeasurement of the plumbing and drainage. 320,000 was allowed, and the actual amount measured was 322. Okay, and then this is then added up, and the difference is shown here, and then you get the actual omission that was carried forward to the final summary that we just showed in the previous slide. Okay, so it's very straightforward, just your summary of additions and omissions. Just note all of these items are VAT exclusive. That's why VAT is subtracted and then added later on. Okay, so that was everything on chapter 6 of your green book. And then finally we're going to look at the last 2 slides for chapter 6. So chapter 6 is your reporting on financials. So your cost presentation is just as important as gathering it, and this is very important. You might have very accurate costs in your all of your estimations and your work that you've been doing, but if you cannot present it very well, then it will not convey the message correct. And this is the one thing that has to be conveyed, for instance, in your task that has to be submitted, is it should be understandable how the summary, usually executives looks at the bottom line. They are interested in certain particulars of certain items, the rates, etc., but they usually look at the bottom line and they want to see it as quickly as possible. Hence the summary sheets that's usually included in all your reporting. If presented ill-considered, it will lead to confusion, and usually when that confusion occurs, questions arise, and people then it's queried and it has to go back to you and you have to explain, so it just wastes time. So if you can display your information very well, then it's just a much smoother way of operating. Okay, it should reflect a simplistic summary of all your costs of the data, which can be interpreted by both the sophisticated and unsophisticated user. The presentation of the information is not lost in the mass. It can serve as input at any successive stage. So all of your cost reporting in all of the stages that we've been looking at should be able to plug into the next stage. Remember the closed systems that we spoke about in Unit 2. The extent of the reporting depends on the stage of the project. Okay. And then the cost report is cost reports consist of a covering letter, a brief summary of the cost estimate together with all the qualifications, an explanation on the, of the cost plan referring back to all previous cost information, a short summary of the cost together with any recommendations, all detailed cost analysis and explanations, a brief specification of the building on which the estimate is based. So basically you might have all of the costs, but then it doesn't help if whoever reads the information doesn't know what it is referring to. So a description, maybe a drawing, a simplistic drawing, also may assist a lot in explaining the whole concept. So this is also very important for your task. The cost details should be accurate and reliable and good reflection of the market. Okay, and then the estimator and designer should work closely together. Okay, the estimator's responsibilities, so you can go through that. The estimator should show good leadership. You should have adequate advice on items. For instance, if a client asks, but why is this so expensive? Then you can, this building is more expensive than a previous one that we've done. Then you can explain, but it's a site, the site is a sloping site, and it will have a larger site preparation cost, for instance. Then you've got planning. You should be continuously provide assistance as a member of the professional team. So you should be at the meetings, the planning meetings, to understand what everyone is looking at. For instance, if it might be said in a meeting that where a design meeting that access control to the building should be included in the price, or it might be said that it should be excluded from the construction cost, and then the client would pay for it himself. That type of thing is very important. So planning for that is very important. And then the implementation, he should be able to implement what he advises, e.g. he should be able to compile the necessary documents in order to obtain competitive tenders. This is now understanding it, conveying the design team's design, what everyone was thinking or implying should be included, should be provided for. Then coordination, he has the important coordination function during all of the phases, getting all of the information. If he's lacking information and he sees that the engineers hasn't provided adequate or the architect hasn't provided adequate information to the engineers, he can coordinate that so that he can actually do his measurement and include it in his bill. So he has a very big coordination function. Control, his most important function is cost control, to keep the cost within the limits. If he sees that certain items is taking the cost way over the original budget, he should speak to the team and indicate this. Can't we, for instance, change this or reduce this size or this wall, or take it maybe to this side? So that is the control function that he is responsible for. And then he has responsibility. He's a full member of the professional team and should thus be able to take responsibility for decisions and advice given to him. Okay, thanks everyone. That's the theory section of Unit 5. So in the next few lectures we'll look at payment certificates. That is the only calculation items that we will have in Unit 5. All of the best to everyone.